So the first question is, what is the policy regarding the administration of the K-2 math assessments? So first we have a state statute that tells us that we shall adopt and provide developmentally appropriate individualized assessment instruments rather than standardized tests for first and second grades. We also have a state school board policy that requires schools and districts to implement assessments at grades K1 and 2 that include ongoing documented assessments throughout the year and a summative at the end of the year. There are some intended purposes of these assessments. First is to provide information about the progress of each student so that you can make instructional decisions. It's also to provide the next year teacher with information about the status of their incoming students. To inform the parents about the status of their children relative to the grade level standards. And to provide the school and district with information about achievement status and progress of those groups. So is it required to use the state assessment, or can our district write our own? So the state developed assessments can be used as presented or adapted. Each school district has the power to determine which assessment best fits their needs. Remember that the mandate is that there will be ongoing formative assessment with a summative assessment at the end of the year. So the assessments that can be used may be state-developed materials, adaptations of the state-developed materials, or unique assessments adopted by your local school board.
Okay, it's saying that they're having trouble, a couple people finding sound.
Okay, so we're having trouble with the sound.
Sounds good here on our end. If you're still having difficulty.
Okay, so we'll ask you again, if you can hear the sound, if you would please raise your hand. Okay. All right, looks like we're sounding okay again. Sorry if the sound cut out. I'm not sure if it's our computer. It might be our system here.
Looks like everybody's on. Most people are on.
Okay, looks like we're looking good right now. All right, so the next question then is, how are the state assessments developed? A lot of people ask us, where do you come up with these tasks? And they wonder if Kitty and I are just sitting up here coming up with questions off the top of our head. And so there's actually quite a few things happen. In June, we bring together a team of teachers, curriculum leaders, and institutes of higher ed to meet and review and revise the assessment. Then once the drafts are completed, they're formatted and edited to be sent to districts for vetting. In August, districts that were part of the vetting process assembled teams to review the assessments and provide feedback regarding the tasks, the rubrics, the layout of the manual and the student booklet, and to give us any other general feedback. Once all the feedback is collected, a committee meets here at DPI to review all the feedback, discuss whether changes should be made to the tasks and rubrics, and make edits in preparation for field testing. Then Kitty and I take the assessments to a school and do all of the tasks with students. During this process, we find that sometimes wording needs to be changed and directions clarified. Following the field test, we determine what final edits should be made to the assessments, and at the end of the process, we post the assessments so the district contact can access them and disseminate it to their district. At this point, if the district chooses to make changes to the assessments, they can. So who was involved this year? We had writers from Onslow, Craven, Buncombe, Wake County, and Charlotte-Mecklenburg, along with Jean Joyner from Meredith College. And then we had several vetting teams from around the state. You can see the list there. And we were joined by Dr. Drew Polly from UNC Charlotte to help with final edits. Okay, so the summative timeline is much like the timeline for the mid-year. The timeline is tentative, and sometimes we have circumstances beyond our control that change it, but we try to stick to it as closely as possible. So we're looking at starting to vet the summative assessment in December. So if there are any districts out there that are interested in helping us with the vetting process, please send me an email to let me know, and our contact information will be given at the end of the webinar. And we'll be starting that process very soon.
Also, I just want to throw in, a lot of times if there's people who are struggling with the assessment, it's a good way to get buy-in, getting districts, people together to kind of talk about it and talk through this process. So that might be something as a district you're interested in bringing some people in to help with that process and get that buy-in so they understand how this all works.
Okay, so the mid-year formative assessment, how has it changed? This year, to make the assessment more formative, the rubric's been modified. This is a change that many of the districts have asked us for. Remember that the mandate is for ongoing formative assessment throughout the year and then a summative. So while the tasks have not been greatly modified, the way we look at scoring them has. The new rubric is comprised of 3 proficiency headings. The first is meet standard. If a student meets the standard, he shows proficiency and full understanding of the concept with conceptual understanding and flexibility in problem solving. If a student is progressing, he demonstrates an inconsistent understanding and may be able to complete the majority of a task, but not the entire task. And if a student is scored as not yet, he shows a minimal understanding and conceptual understanding still needs to be developed. The purpose of this rubric is to aid teachers in determining where to go instructionally so that students can meet their standards. A new tool has been developed to help with those decisions, and we'll look at that in just a few minutes. So when looking at student responses, you want to be paying attention to what the student does and what a student does and does not understand. Both are equally important in determining the next steps. So we look beyond whether an item's answer is correct or incorrect and look at the type of mistake that was made. Sometimes it's lack of information, sometimes lack of understanding, but we want to look at those to see what kinds of misconceptions may exist. So let's take a look at this student sample. At first glance, it looks like the student understands the concept and answered correctly. However, each measurement is exactly 1 inch off. And as the teacher, I'd want to make sure I knew exactly what the student did to get her measurements. And I can most likely make an inference about what she did, but I don't want to assume that I understand the student's thought process. So when I asked her about how she measured the ribbons, she explained that you start at the 1 on the ruler instead of at the 0. So having her explain her incorrect answer gave us insight into what she knows and doesn't know about measurement. So instructional decisions could be made about where to take her next. With the measurement task, it's also important to note that they were, when we loaded them with our Word program, they were a certain number of inches long, but depending on what type of word processing program you may be using, it may show up differently. So you would want to measure prior to giving it to the students to make sure that you have the same measurements. So that brings us to our next tool, which is the next steps or instructional moves. So this is a tool that we have created this year to give you suggestions for instructional steps for each level of the rubric. It helps to determine student understanding, but it is not an exhaustive list of strategies. Teachers should use professional judgment when making decisions about their students. So what does it look like and how is it used? So here's the cover of the first grade Next Steps document. Here's a page out of that document. The next steps is aligned to the tasks in the assessment. So you can see where it says task 1 and it has the standard there. This is from numbers and operations in base 10. And then it also contains the same proficiency headings. Beneath each heading is a listing of strategies that may be used to move a student forward in understanding the concept. But remember that this is not an exhaustive list of strategies, nor is it a checklist of strategies that must be used. This is a tool to aid teachers in making instructional decisions. And as we move forward with this tool, we hope to make improvements every year. This is another reason that the vetting process is so important, as we received a lot of feedback about this particular tool.
Okay, and the tool that she just explained, that Denise just explained, those are tools that you can use if you so choose. So you do not have to use those. Those are just some suggestions that you may choose to do so. The questions that we've talked about, these are also questions that are in the manual. So as you look at the admin manual, you can go back and they're there, but we're just talking about and elaborating on some of these because these are questions we tend to get over and over again in emails. So here's a question that is commonly asked. Do I have to give the assessment all at once with all of the tasks in order? So as you look at this, you can choose, you use your professional judgment about how you want to sequence these. Think about your instruction, what works best for your students and to meet their needs. The tasks do not have to be in the booklet form, or do they need to be given all at one time? The order, again, depends on your instruction, what meets the needs, your needs, and your students' needs. A lot of times we will reference you to your district leaders because districts sometimes have things that they like to have happen, and they've had that conversation within the district. So your best reference would be your district leaders. And if they have questions, then they could ask us, but typically those are answered at the district level. Again, some of the tasks may have multiple parts. You may want to administer those together or separately. Use your professional judgment of how you would like to make that happen. So here's an example of a task. And you can see here there's the caterpillars, and they have to create a line plot with this. So there's a couple of different parts. You might want to do one part one day and another part a separate day, or depending on your students, you may want to do those at the same time. That is not written in stone that you have to do it one way or the other. Again, you need to make that call or let your district make that call of how they want it done so that it's consistent. Another example here, we have a different task, and it has a couple different parts. It could be done at one time, it could be done at separate times, or for some students, you may do it one way, and for other students to meet their needs, it may be done in a different way. So assessment timing. So during daily instruction, students should have a relaxed atmosphere in which to do these tasks. It is not a timed task, a timed test, and they need to be given as much time within reason. We want kids to know that formative assessment should be part of your instruction, to move your instruction. It should not be something that's separate and different. We assess students every day, even as they walk in the door, we're assessing, hey, looks like he's ready for a great day of learning, or he doesn't look like he's feeling well. So we're always assessing all the time, and that's the same way with mathematics. Task and mathematics assessment are designed to mirror task and assessment items that students should be experiencing throughout the year. Shouldn't be just going on, oh, here's formative assessment time. It's going on every day, all day, in everything we do. Another question that we get often is, can the assessment be read aloud? This is a math assessment, so of course it can be read aloud. Every student is eligible for read aloud on the K2 mathematics assessment, and teachers may read aloud all directions and all questions to the students. Remember, the assessment is about the math, not about the reading. If students ask for clarification, a teacher may reread the directions often, as many times as they need to. It talks about if you need to substitute a familiar word with an unfamiliar word, then do so. Do what you need to do. The structure of the problem or task should not be changed if using a substitution, a different word. The teacher should not interpret the problem structure for students. So, for example, we talk about the different problem types. You need to keep those words in there like fewer, because that is the problem type, and those words need to be kept in there to make sure that they learn and understand those different problem types. All right, and then another question is the assessment given individually or as a whole group? And again, you need to use your teacher judgment or your district may have suggestions of how they want this handled. It can be done numerous ways. It can be done as a whole class. It can be done in small groups, or it can be done individually. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. As a whole class, you might want to read all the directions to the entire class and let them each work on the same item. If you do a whole class, remember then that means that most of them are going to typically take about the same time. And you need to make sure that you have adequate supplies and materials and manipulatives for all students if you do it as a whole class. If you do a small group, teacher may read the directions for each task aloud to the small students. And then the small group, again, if it's a smaller group, more likely they'll be all ending approximately the same time. And then individually, some students may need individual. You know what your students' needs are. Use your professional judgment. Another question I remember one email asked was that the paper wasn't a big enough space for the student. By all means, you do not have to use the space on the paper. Use a piece of chart paper, construction paper. Use whatever you need so that you can understand what students know. Use your professional judgment to help guide these formative assessments, which will in turn guide your instruction.
Okay, so here's another question that we get quite frequently. May students use tools during the assessment? And yeah, students may use the tools, any kind of tools to solve problems, except during mental math exercises if they're told specifically to use mental math to solve the problem. Otherwise, they are able to use whatever tools are available in the classroom. There are some tools that are suggested in the manual, but you could use others. For example, if students use hundreds boards in the classroom when problem solving, it's totally acceptable for them to use the hundreds board during the assessment. So here's an example. This is from kindergarten. So this student was presented this problem with Billy had 3 cookies and his mom gave him 2 more. And so she chose to draw a picture here to represent the 3 cookies plus the 2 cookies. In the next problem, Sally had 1 brown teddy bear and 3 black teddy bears. And there were tools available on the table. So the student chose to use counters to represent the teddy bears. And then in the last problem, she chose to draw lollipops, and you can see where in the last lollipop she X'd it out. And we asked her afterwards, why did you choose to use the counters for the second problem, but not in the first and the third problem? And she told us it was because she didn't want to draw the teddy bears. So, give your students the opportunity to use tools that are available in the classroom. Okay, so what should the teacher be doing during the assessment? Excuse me. So the teacher is encouraged to find out as much as possible about what students are thinking and how they are going about working on the tasks, right? Asking questions to gain insight, making notes about the student responses, but not coaching or instructing on how to answer the question. Right, so we want to know, or the intent of the assessment is to determine what students know and don't know about the math concepts. Right, so here, this is just a funny picture to show how do you know, show your thinking, and you can see what the student did there. But that doesn't really tell us exactly what the student knows regarding this standard. So to make instructional decisions, you definitely want to know what the students are thinking. So in this task, the student was asked to describe the shaded part of the circle, and this is what the student answered. Right, so while this student did answer the question the way it was presented, which we later revised so that it was more mathematical, it doesn't really tell us what the child knows about partitioning. So what should the teacher do, right? So do we just count this answer as incorrect because it's not mathematically correct? Or do we ask the student to give a description in math language and ask other probing questions to determine if they understand partitioning, right? So, and we've been asked before, well, this is what they wrote. I mean, what do I do about it now? Well, I would just call the student back over and say, can you explain to me what this means, right? So once you give the assessment, it doesn't mean you can't go back and ask students questions about what they've done in their work. So another example, this student, said they had to determine whether Marcus is correct. and explain how you know. And so in this task, the student determined that Marcus was correct and drew these pictures of number lines. And for us, we could have just left that as is and just kind of made an assumption about what the student understood, but we wanted to know a little bit more. So what should this teacher do? Just accept the answer as is and make an assumption, or ask the student to explain his or her thinking when using the number line. And as we talked to this child, he was really flexible with using the number line, and he really understood how to use the properties of operations to figure out his answers. So what we're giving you now is quite a few student examples here. So this is another one we get a lot of questions about. So the student is asked to determine whether the answer is true or false, or the equation, and to explain their reasoning. And so here we have 25 equals 52. And you can see where the child drew 2 10s and 5 1s, and 5 10s and 2 1s. But it wasn't just the drawing. Like, we talked with students and asked them, what can you tell me about what you drew here? And they explained this idea of the 10s and the 1s. And the same for this question here. When asked 6 equals 10 minus 4, is that true or false? And the student showed us 6 and then showed 10 and took away 4 to get 6, so that they could determine that that equation was true. So in this task, the student was asked to explain if the numbers are same or different. And initially, the student just wrote that 16 is less than 61, and then wrote it again. And so, but that didn't really give us an idea of what the child really understood about whether or not those numbers were the same or different. And when asked to explain more, he told us that 61 is 6 10s and 1 1, but 16 is 1 10 and 6 1s. And so he not only drew the 10s and 1s, but then gave us a verbal explanation as well.
And sometimes you might just have to ask. As we were working with the students, of course, when we go in, the students don't know us. So it's always a little challenging to build that rapport quickly so that they feel comfortable. But our goal is to find out, what do they know? And so we may need to rephrase, or again say, can you show me a little bit more about what you're thinking?
Okay, so the student summary sheet is there. It's located in the student booklet, and it's there for you to use to take individual or notes on individual students, so that you can share them at the conference or to plan instruction. So, if you're walking around the classroom and watching students do these tasks, you can be taking notes on what they're doing, what if there's any patterns in their thinking, so that you can go back when you are talking to parents or when you're planning your instruction. So this is a major question that comes up quite often. What if a student writes a solution equation and not an equation that matches the situation? And this standard from first and second grade is that the student will represent and solve problems involving addition and subtraction, with the situations of adding to, taking from, putting together, taking apart, and comparing, with unknowns in all positions, with equations with a symbol for the unknown to represent the problem. So that's the standard, where we want students to represent the problem that's presented. So here's a problem here. And there's a lot that I can learn about this student by looking at their work, right? So the student drew 7 pencils, drew a line, and then drew additional pencils to get to 24, and then went back and counted how many pencils she drew after her line. And that's how she solved the problem. So she was relying on counting strategies for problem solving rather than using the relationship between addition and subtraction or creating an equation. So the difference between a solution equation and an equation that matches the situation is the location of the unknown. In this problem, it's an add to, start unknown type problem. The situation shows that I had something, which is the unknown, added 7 more, and then got a result of 24. So for this particular problem, the unknown is the initial quantity. So the student put the box for the unknown at the beginning of the equation. If she had written 24 minus 7, that would have been a solution equation, not the one that represents the problem. So this particular child depended on counting strategies, but she then knew to go back and write a solution equation, a situation equation that matched the situation. So down in the bottom box, that's what we're looking for, equations that represent the problem, not the solution equation, which may be different. Okay.
Okay, you get a next question? Or is that the end of that section?
That's just...
Okay, before we go on, let's answer a couple of questions. There's a question that says, why is there not above standard to help teachers understand? Do you want to answer that, or you want to go through them and then come back and answer?
That's coming up.
Okay, after we get through the questions, we'll come back, like Catherine, Cyril, you have some questions, we'll come back and hit on the ones that she doesn't answer, okay?
Okay, so we're talking about scoring the assessment. We have the proficiency rubrics there to determine proficiency and performance and understanding for the tasks. And the rubrics are located in the student assessment for kindergarten and the administration manual for first and second grades. And here's a sample of just a proficiency rubric where it gives you the task, the standard, and then an answer key. And sometimes the answer key may have sample student responses. And then you can see there the rubric where it says not yet progressing and meets standard. So how do I determine an overall mathematical proficiency? So here we have, when students are proficient, they can model, explain, use the math appropriately and accurately, and they're fluent and comfortable in applying the mathematics. But this assessment, whether it's the mid-year formative or the summative assessment, is just a snapshot. It just provides a picture of that student's performance at that one point in time. The assessment itself just gives us a glimpse, and it should be used in conjunction with other formative assessments and math work to determine their overall proficiency. So this assessment is not intended to provide a complete picture of a student's math understanding, and you should combine it with additional documentation and so that you can make inferences about student achievement and support each student's development. So I think this question has come up. So this assessment addresses student levels of proficiency, but does not address whether a student performs above proficient. So there's going to be situations where a student shows a greater depth of understanding, but in looking at this particular assessment, we're looking at whether or not that standard is met. And again, because this is just a piece of the student's overall photo album, if you will, it's just looking at whether or not the standard is met, not whether or not the student goes above and beyond that. That would come with other work and other assessments that you may be doing. So if students are showing a greater depth of understanding or more complex thinking than what's addressed on the rubrics, then you use your professional judgment in determining whether that student has shown performance and understanding above the level of proficient. And then when looking at overall proficiency, this assessment should be combined with the additional documentation to look at whether or not a student is a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 overall. Again, this assessment is just there to determine whether or not the student meets the standard, not whether or not the student is going above and beyond the standard.
Okay. And then someone, which kind of ties into this, Denise, you may want to address this. This is, how about if students refuse to take the task? You know how sometimes they just don't want to do it? They were saying that one does not represent, they don't feel that one represents their answer. So, I mean, and you could just document in there, and that if that's what you want to do, just document and say student did not, and then that's your notes. Again, you have to remember, what is the purpose of this? Is to guide your instruction. And so, and you want to share that when you do parent conferences. So every time you have a question, again, what is the intent? What is the purpose of this task? Is to guide your instruction. How does that guide your instruction? And how will you tweak your instruction? Now, what does that tell you about that student to move forward?
Okay, so looking at the student data, which everybody's always talking about data, right? So again, you have the student summary sheets that you can take notes on individual students, and each student booklet has a student summary sheet. But then you also have a class summary sheet that's used to compile all the students' proficiency levels for each task, so that you can do some instructional groupings and planning. And then, of course, we've added this tool, the next steps document, so that now you have a listing. And again, it's not a checklist and it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a nice place to kind of start with, this is what happened on this task, and this is how I can move forward with my students. So you have those tools available for you to use to start looking at student data. Okay, so we're going to go back and look at what additional
questions. Okay,
questions.
So here's one question. It says, is the math vocabulary not important? It seems as if word substitutions could negate the importance of the vocabulary. So we were talking about if a kid didn't understand a word. It could be as simple as a name, if you want to use that student's name. You don't want to change the words that would change meaning. And if it's a math word that they should know for that standard, then you definitely wouldn't want to change that math word. So words, when I'm thinking about words like this, I think about English language learners and how some of those words, they may not understand what they mean. So that's the kind of the words, the context of words. Like if you're talking about golf and they don't understand golf, change it to a different sport. If you're talking about a daisy and they don't understand what a daisy is, that's the kind of vocabulary I was referring to, not the math vocabulary. All right, so Sandra, if you have another question about that, let me know. It says, can a teacher explicitly say you can use any manipulative? Denise?
Well, if students are using manipulatives in the classroom on a consistent basis, then they are used to going and getting those. Again, that's a question too that you may want to check with your district. We get a lot of the questions about manipulatives from the district level. So, they may have come up and said with this one in particular, we'd prefer the students not use the manipulatives, but for the most part, they are able to use them. And if they're consistently using them in the classroom, they should know that when I'm problem solving, I can go get X tool to do that.
Okay. Another question, it says, please clarify. Are you saying students do not have to write to show their thinking? They can show objects and be scored on that?
It depends on what it says on the task itself. Some say show your thinking using pictures, objects, words, or numbers. And so at that point, if a student shows something, then you may go back and ask them to clarify with words. But again, this is another question that you may want to just clarify with your district, because they may have some other rules in place with the rubrics.
And then Amy says, would you just write on the assessment that they use manipulatives for their answer?
Well, when we give field tests, we often take photographs of their work so that we have it to show this is what the student did. So, I mean, that's another. I know that some of you are keeping documentation for different portfolios, and so that would be a nice way to keep that as well.
Okay, and then another question, it says, this is about the day's webinar. It says, will it be available later?
Yes, we're going to be posting it'll be posted before the end of this week.
Okay, and it says, are these assessments shared online or only through district level specialists?
Yes, we've been asked by districts to keep the K2 assessment secure. So we do release older versions of the assessment on our wiki, and then the current assessment is located on a private wiki we have one contact person for every district that has that information, and then they share that information out through the district.
Okay, another question, does a district have to use the assessment recording sheet given, or can they develop one that suits their purposes for instruction?
Well, each district is autonomous, so they can use whichever, you're welcome to change however you want to record assessment data.
All right, and then another question, if students are supposed to use words, are we looking for complete sentences or the correct thinking process. So we're definitely we're not looking for complete sentences. We're not grading for English and spelling. We're looking for the correct thinking process. And so they typically are given lots of options. It could be done with pictures, numbers, and or words.
Right. But again, that's if your district has made other stipulations on that rubric, then you may want to just make sure that you're in line with what your district is saying.
Okay, another question. Can students use a calculator on the assessment? So calculators, most of the time, that's not a tool that they would need to use for the assessment. I guess there may be a time when it would be appropriate.
And a lot of what we're looking at with the standards is whether or not they understand the place value relationship. And so they may not be able to demonstrate their understanding of place value and properties of operations if they're using the calculator.
Okay. Another question, are districts allowed to use any assessment, such as an online quick assessment?
So the mandate is that there is ongoing formative assessment throughout the year and a summative assessment at the end of the year. And if districts are not using the state developed assessments or modification of the state development assessments, it needs to be one adopted by their local school board.
All right, and all the information was at the beginning of the webinar, which you will have access to, so you can go and look at what is mandated. This one, Tamara wants to know, are districts allowed to use any assessment? Oh, we just said that one. Okay, this one is, so am I understand that each district will have to print these assessment task books? So again, it is your choice. These are there for you to use them if you so choose to do so. If you have something else that you'd rather use, then you are welcome to use those. How you do it, if you have one sheet and then you let that one sheet, each kid write on their own paper. I mean, think about different ways that you want to do it. There's no one right way to do it. We just provide these for you and you use them how best meets your needs. Next question, how do we find out who our district rep is that will give us the most current assessment? We have been using the public wiki.
Most often that district rep is somebody in your district office, either in curriculum and instruction or in accountability. A lot of times it's an elementary director or a math specialist. Jana, if you email me or Kitty, we can find out who your district rep is.
Okay. Then it says, is it okay to use any of the tasks as an artifact for the KEA assessment?
Is from what we understand in our interaction with early learning that it is okay to use the tasks as artifacts. But Daphne, I'll need to double check and make sure before I give you a definitive answer. So again, if you will email me that question, we'll check and make sure.
Okay. And then Alice wants to know, or she said that in the past they've omitted different tasks from the mid-year and added to the summative. And Denise spoke about that earlier on. You're welcome to change and tweak and modify these assessments. These are just suggestions, as always. And many districts do. What they'll do is they'll go on our wiki, they'll pull a different assessment or different task because they may not have used that certain standard in the first half of the year. And so they just switch them out. You can change, tweak, modify, and again, that's one of the slides to support that. Okay, then we have, is there a way for us to view the next step instruction document that is new this year? Where are these recommendations coming from?
So the next steps document is with all the other assessment documents. So with the manual, the student book, and the next steps is all housed together on the wiki. So you would need to talk with your district rep about where that's coming from or where that is. The recommendations for the next step document came from math coaches and teachers and professors that interacted with the assessment.
Okay, and then Joanna has, can we translate the item or provide first language support as long as we don't explain the problem?
Yes. We actually have had people translate the assessment. Again, this is, we want to know if students understand the math. So if you need to translate, as long as you're not explaining the problem or changing the structure of the problem, translation is fine.
All right. And then Tamara brings out a point about the KEA. She says if the tasks are used for the KEA, then the evidence won't be a mid-year assessment since KEA collects only the first 60 days. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So with Offices of Early Learning, they are looking at the K3 assessment. And I think that's where I get that answer, that you may use parts of the assessments, the math assessments, as part of your K3 assessment portfolio.
Okay. I think we have covered all the questions. It says, will the summative assessment have a different rubric?
The summative assessment will look the same as it has in the past with level 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, the goal here was to make it more formative in nature and to help guide instruction. And so that's why these, as the teachers came together with Jean and Jean Joyner, and we talked about this, we wanted to make it more formative. So the summative is summative, so it'll be the same as what you're currently used to, but we did want to help it to guide instruction. Okay, so we have Alice. It says, is there a testing window that will be released for us to follow? And your testing, that is determined by your district. Again, we provide the support and provide these assessments that you may use or tweak or alter, but the window is all provided by your district, so that's a district level question. Can we share the formative assessment task with parents? Yes, that would be great to show them what they're doing. Talk about, what are they doing at home to support this standard and how they may help move their child along on this continuum. Then I have a question you might have answered. The wiki released what standards will be in the mid-of-year benchmark. Is it okay to share that with the teachers, right? Yes.
Yes, we put that actually on the public wiki as well under assessment. So that was shared in August. So anyone has access to that. And I think there's a back question. Can the next steps documents be given as a resource for interventions? I don't see why not. Again, it's to help with what are the next steps that we can take with these students to have them progress.
All right, I think we've answered all the questions. You had some great questions. And again, this will be on our wiki. You can use bits and pieces of it to talk as a team during your PLC, at your school level, at your district level, however it best meets your needs. There is no one right way to do this. And again, your goal is what do you want to know what students know about mathematics. And so every time you have a question about how to proceed with an assessment, that's what you should ask yourself. How is this going to help guide instruction? What do kids know? What do I know that this child knows about mathematics? So if you ask yourself that question, I think that'll help you move you forward with these assessments. And we thank you for everything you do every day with your students, because we know through research the one single factor that has the most influence on students' success is their teacher. And you are important and you're making a difference every day in the life of your students. So thank you very much. And we hope you have a great day. And if you miss us, feel free to listen to this webinar again.
over and over again.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us as well. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.